married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9 o'clock. Happy Tuesday, one and all. I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News Tonight. Fears of an escalation of the Israel-Hamas war grow as the US weighs up deploying non-combat troops to the region, and Iran warns the bombing of Gaza must stop immediately. So, are we hurtling towards World War III? Former British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford gives his take shortly. Meanwhile, after sending billions to Ukraine, can Britain afford to support Israel? And should ordinary Brits be urged to take in refugees from the conflict? I'll get stuck into that with my panel of top pundits tonight. Esther McVeigh, Derek Lord and Rebecca Reid. In my big opinion tonight, they were called right-wing, they were called COVID deniers, and they were called granny killers. But those who called out the madness of lockdowns, for which we're now paying a huge price, were right all along. I'll be responding to shock new revelations from the ongoing COVID inquiry, about which the rest of the media have been silent. Also coming up, as biological males who identify as women are allowed to participate in the brutal martial art of jiu-jitsu against females, could this trans madness see a woman die in the ring? Olympian turned women's rights champion Sharon Davies dives into that one. Plus, he's been cleared of all charges. The guy's innocent, but the woke mob are still trying to destroy legendary actor Kevin Spacey, this week cancelling his comeback film from the cinema. GB News superstar Nana Akua makes the case for the Oscar winner's redemption, and she tackles Harry and Meghan's latest eco-hypocrisy. You won't believe it. She's with us shortly. And as it's revealed, a quarter of Brits are now inked. Are visible tattoos in the workplace unprofessional? Kerry Katona takes on Kim Woodburn in The Clash. As always, you'll get a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. And one of Britain's top journalists, Tom Bauer, is uncancelled later in the show. Stand by for an action-packed 2 hours. Prepare to be shocked by my big opinion. That's in 2 minutes after the news and Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you and good evening to you. Well, let's bring you some more on that breaking news we brought to you an hour ago. Officials in Gaza saying at least 300 people have been killed and 200 more have been injured in an attack on a hospital in Gaza City where thousands were seeking shelter. Palestinian officials are saying it was caused by an Israeli airstrike. But within the last 10 minutes, Israeli intelligence services have said they believe it was a failed Hamas rocket attack on Israel. And they're blaming the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They're saying from the analysis of the IDF's operational systems, an enemy rocket barrage was launched towards Israel, which passed in the vicinity of the hospital when it was hit. Well, the Al Ali Arab Hospital is currently engulfed in flames. Survivors, as we can see from pictures on TV, if you're watching on screen, being pulled out and transferred to nearby hospitals. The World Health Organization has issued a statement condemning the explosion, calling it unprecedented. And the Palestinian president has declared 3 days of mourning. And in response, Palestinians have been clashing with security forces in Ramallah in the West Bank. There are also reports coming to us of the Israeli embassy in Jordan being breached in protest after the explosion. Well, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Zippy Hotovelli, responded to the news of the hospital attack a short time ago on GB News.
This is a war that Hamas started from this horrible massacre that happened in October 7th. I think everyone is still shocked in this country, in Israel and around the world from the atrocities were exposed that Hamas did. And as we speak, there are still 199 Israelis, including children and Holocaust survivors, grandparents, that are kept hostage in Hamas hands. I want to check what happened, but I'm sure and I can guarantee you we never target civilians. Well, a British-Israeli teenager who's been missing since last weekend's terror attacks by Hamas has been confirmed dead today. 13-year-old Yahal and her mother Liane were both killed when gunmen attacked their kibbutz last weekend. Her sister Noya and their father Eli are still missing. And here the Prime Minister has called for the immediate release of hostages taken by Hamas. Now, in news away from Israel, the return of Islamist terrorism poses a threat to all European nations. That's according to the French President Emmanuel Macron. His comments came a day after 2 Swedish football fans were shot dead in a terrorist attack in Brussels before Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier against Sweden. Belgium's police say the suspect, who identified himself online as being a member of Islamic State shortly after the attack, was killed this morning. The Scottish First Minister is pledging £300 million to cut NHS waiting lists in Scotland. Humza Yousaf told the SNP conference in Aberdeen it could reduce waiting lists by 100,000 patients by 2026. He also pledged to freeze council tax in Scotland next year. The First Minister made a comment about the Israel conflict as well today, saying that with family in Gaza, he calls on the international community to set up a refugee programme for those fleeing from the Gaza Strip. And in news here at home, yellow weather warnings for wind and rain will be in place from tomorrow. And the arrival of Storm Babette is being warned about. It's the second named storm of the season. It'll last until Saturday. The Met Office is talking about potential flooding, power cuts and travel disruption. And that weather warning covering much of Scotland, eastern part of Northern Ireland and the north and east of England.
on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's been a good week to hide away bad news, but not on my watch. Spread this one far and wide, folks. Professor Mark Woolhouse, a leading virus expert who advised the government during the COVID pandemic, do you remember the pandemic? Those were the days. Well, he has slammed the 3 national lockdowns as a failure of public health policy. For this, I'm happy to award him tonight's No Shit Sherlock Award. But at least he's being honest. Woolhouse clearly no sheep. He said the decision to shut the country down, which saw the borrowing of £500 billion, the collapse of thousands of businesses, kids kept out of school, and the creation of a waiting list of 7.6 million people in the NHS was disproportionate, unsustainable, and here's the kicker, not as effective as was being claimed. So whilst people who worried about the impact of this Chinese Communist Party-inspired experiment to stop a virus were labelled right-wing, COVID deniers or granny killers, in fact, they've been proved right. Woolhouse told the COVID inquiry, which I fear is going to be a bigger stitch-up than a property deal with Donald Trump, that alternatives to lockdown were not developed and delivered with sufficient urgency in 2020. You can say that again. He told them he couldn't find any good analysis that showed stay-at-home orders made a difference. He also said that this draconian economy-destroying policy should have been a last resort. Except, of course, it wasn't, with politicians and government scientists waving their willies around and becoming national rock stars with this insane decision to tell healthy people not to leave the house. Woolhouse said he became very, very frustrated with SAGE and that if there had been a separate scientific committee gathering evidence on the harms of lockdowns, it could have influenced decisions. We said it at the time, but we were the bad people, remember? Meanwhile, last month, the UK Health Security Agency, who I think we can agree are not a bunch of swivel-eyed nutjob conspiracy theorists tweeting from their mother's bedroom, quietly released a review which found that the evidence base for the effectiveness of social distancing, masking and lockdowns was weak. I can't believe it. Even those border restrictions which impacted businesses and families look to have failed. Now, I'm angry about this, and here's why you should be too. Because most of our current problems are down to this failed policy. The constraints on the government to spend money on our health service, schools and policing is down to this failed policy. Inflation, the eye-watering national debt, the cost of living and higher interest rates are down to this failed policy. Damaged kids, a legacy of domestic abuse, a mental health tsunami, crumbling public services, an NHS waiting list longer than a night out with Keith Richards. It's all down to this failed policy. A work-shy nation with productivity through the floor is down to this failed policy. As civil servants and public sector employees insist on working from home, where they can do Zoom meetings in their pyjamas, catch up on missed episodes of Loose Women, and crack open their first bottle of San Miguel at 4 in the afternoon as they peruse their final emails of the day. Scientists who had precious little evidence to justify this wild experiment took control of the country and smashed it into a brick wall. When future generations look at what we were dealing with, a potentially nasty but predominantly mild seasonal respiratory virus, and one non-fatal to most, they'll have just one question. What the hell were we thinking? Never again. Now, what's your reaction, Mark at gbnews.com? Let's get the views of former Cabinet Minister and GB News star Esther McVey, banker and visiting professor Derek Lord, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. What's your reaction to this bombshell from this top medic at Woolhouse?
Many of us had thought this for some time. And actually, we had a pandemic preparedness strategy in 2011, which was not for lockdowns. 27 EU countries had pandemic plans in place, not for lockdowns. And they were published in the European Disease and Control book, in 2020. And then 3 weeks later, Italy went into lockdown. So we ripped up our plans, our framework, our ethical plans, our legal structures to go into lockdown. And the thing that upset me the most was the censorship that came with it. So if you queried, why are we doing this? What it's about? Why have we ripped up all of our plans to go into an untested lockdown? You were vilified in one way or another.
You were a bad person.
I was a bad person, and I remember I got the first lockdown because nobody knew what it was. The March to June, nobody...
3 weeks to flatten the curve. We all swallowed that one, didn't we?
After that, when we knew a little bit more who was vulnerable, and we've always said, protect the vulnerable. Everybody said that, protect. But when we knew more about it, you did not need these lockdowns. And as you so rightly said, all of the things that have come to pass from that, poverty, mental health, health issues, what happened to young children, I said the domestic abuse, businesses, the economy, the whole thing stems from 2 years of closing down the world. As you rightly said, an experiment, and the costs have been significant.
Of course, the experts now changing their tune, Rebecca, but this won't be reported in many quarters because there's a whole generation of journalists and politicians who are very attached to this narrative that we had to lock down.
This is currently the lead story on Sky, The Guardian, The Telegraph and 4 other papers.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it.
So to suggest that it's not on the mainstream media is absolutely untrue.
But
what about the Health Security Agency's report a month ago that suggested there was no evidence?
Also covered in the mainstream media.
No,
I
googled it today. The only place I could find it was unheard.
I will totally admit that GBNews talked about it earlier and talked about it in more depth, but it is absolutely being covered. What I would like to point out is that this isn't like a silver bullet finding of today that now all the experts agree. Different experts have said different things. I am not a lockdown person. I didn't like it. I lost the end of my 20s to it. It wasn't fun. I don't want to go into lockdown ever again. However, a different professor has said, Professor Stephen, I can't remember what his surname is now, also said today in the inquiry that had we gone into lockdown on the 9th of March rather than the 23rd of March, that we would have had to do a COVID-related death.
That old chestnut.
So you can't realistically say that the decision has been made that it was a bad idea, full stop. Different experts think different
and that's
things.
exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying it on national television.
But then here's my question. Whose fault is it? Who do you blame?
I blame Boris Johnson for being weak-willed and caving into Sage and going against his libertarian conservative principles. I'm going against the health advisors who, most certainly because they were in power. However, aided and abetted by Keir Starmer, 100 Tory backbenchers tried to stop the third national lockdown. I'm assuming you were one of them.
I was one of them.
And with Labour's votes, that lockdown could have been stopped.
But how does it...
Exactly.
That feels like a very tangential way of blaming Labour for something the Tories were responsible for.
Well, Labour could have stopped it with the support of 100 rebels.
OK, so the first two,
Labour
purely on Tories.
They were never in the anti-lobby, trust me.
OK, but let's talk about the people who were actually in charge.
Sure, and ultimately it's Boris Johnson.
But if it's your... If
the only man in the room... Well, sorry,
I'm a halfway house.
I'm not quite so sure as both of you are on this, and I think that there couldn't have been a worse time to be Prime Minister than having to take that decision. What I would say, however...
Oh, apologies, Derek. Sorry, an issue with your mic, but apparently it's working again, so carry on.
Marvellous. What I am sure about, however, is that facts matter more than opinion. This has to be scientific. It was a frightening moment of time, and hundreds of thousands of people were losing their lives around the world. And the modelling that I've seen clearly suggests that had we locked down a week earlier, have we still got a problem?
Derek, we've still got a problem with the microphone, as you correctly identified. The bottom line is, why are we talking about this today, Rebecca? We're talking about it because we have rampant inflation.
Well, it's a question
We've
I
got
ask
a
a lot.
national debt. We've got a deficit where more goes out than comes in.
What would you like us to do about it?
Is destroyed.
What would you like us to do? I don't like lockdowns.
I would like to
but what would
debate
you
it
like
on
us to
television
do
so that we make sure this never happens
But it's
again.
never going to happen again. Nobody will ever put up with that ever again.
I'm not so sure.
Will.
I'm not so sure. Tell us, Esther, WHO are planning a global pandemic treaty.
Exactly, they are. And you've got the international health regulations going through at the moment. So I'm not so sure. So actually, in this country, what people are calling for now, at least some Conservative MPs are, is to look at the Public Health Act, which actually actually all of these draconian measures were brought in, not through the Coronavirus Act, not through the Contingency Planning Act. What they were brought through is in the 1984 Public Health Act, and we want that changed. So you can't use secondary legislation, and that's what happened. So MPs weren't around, things weren't voted on, and that's what we want changed, that much more is taken into consideration now that you've seen, as I said, this awful experiment that we've all gone through of this 2 years of lockdown, and we're now seeing the consequence. You cannot now deny the consequences of what's happened to all these people.
I'm not pro it. I completely agree.
This is the act that needs to be changed.
We can't change what already happened, and I find it a little bit frustrating when we want to talk about how
forward.
I know, but when we talk about it over and over and over again, but we don't seem to hold the government who were in charge of it responsible for it, and people want to blame some guy who had a clipboard rather than. And the science wasn't consistent; it didn't agree on all points. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I do genuinely think the people in charge were trying to make the best decision they could at the time. I don't think Boris Johnson wanted to see people crying and miserable and lonely and having mental health problems. I don't think he was craving that.
I also talked about the censorship that happened, that most media didn't want to talk about it, and you couldn't say anything against it, otherwise you were vilified. I know, I was there, I was one of those people.
Also, another reason why we talk about it is because, A, it's why you, my viewers and listeners, are struggling so much, why the economy is screwed, why you can't get a GP appointment, why you're waiting for that hip replacement. It's a legacy of that, and I disagree with Rebecca. She might have found some hidden articles in The Guardian and on Sky.
Mark, sorry, that's actually really annoying. Don't do that. That is on the front page. It is on the front page.
I'm on the front page of The Guardian now, and I cannot find it.
I will send you a link. If you Google COVID, it comes up.
You didn't have it for 2 years, Rebecca.
Fine, absolutely.
It's not. Derek hasn't got a microphone. We're going to fix that, and we're going to turn up Rebecca.
Did we do that deliberately, Rebecca?
Lots more to come. Moving on, still to come, as it's revealed a quarter of Brits are now inked. Are visible tattoos in the workplace unprofessional? Two darlings of celebrity television, Kerry Katona and Kim Woodburn, battle it out in The Clash. But next, fears of an escalation of the Israel-Hamas war grow as the US weighs up deploying non-combat troops to the region, and Iran warns the bombing of Gaza must stop immediately. So are we hurtling towards World War III, or can tensions be eased? We'll speak to former British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. He's next.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GBNews.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, the cat is out of the bag. The COVID inquiry matters because the country is broke as a result of the experiment of lockdowns. That's my view. That's my big opinion. What do you think? Mark at gbnews.com. This from Adrian. Mark, lockdowns saved lives. I worked in the NHS throughout the lockdown, but the people wouldn't have it happen again. But what if we get a really nasty variant, Mark? Richard says, where are the self-righteous lockdown lemmings now? I wouldn't hold your breath for an apology to the people that dared to question the lockdown lemming narrative. Next to come are climate and carbon control lockdowns. Thanks for that. Keep those emails coming. Mark at gbnews.com. Now, The Clash and Nana Acquia coming up this hour. But first, breaking tonight is devastating news that at least 300 people are reported to have died in what some fear was an Israeli airstrike on a hospital in Gaza. The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas declared 3 days of mourning following the explosion, but Israeli forces have denied involvement, saying the explosion was caused by a misfired Palestinian rocket. It comes as the US is reportedly weighing up sending 2,000 non-combat troops to support Israel, whilst Iran has chillingly warned of preemptive strikes if the Israelis launch a ground offensive on Gaza. It comes as the US has sent 2 aircraft carriers to the region, while the Iran-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah has been exchanging fire with Israel across the border in recent days. Well, it's all kicking off. Are we hurtling towards World War III? And where does that leave the UK's involvement? Joining me now is military mastermind and former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for joining us. Simple question for you to start. What is the worst thing that can happen?
Oh, in terms of warfare, the worst thing that can happen is nuclear exchange or nuclear release. But that's highly unlikely to happen in the circumstances that face us at the moment in the Middle East. But it's always at the back of everybody's mind. But nuclear weapons stop other countries using nuclear weapons. I think that's quite clear. So the worst thing that can happen at the moment with the current situation in Gaza is that the war spreads and becomes a global one. I think that's highly unlikely at the moment, but you never know how things are going to develop.
And are Iran the real enemy, given their support for terrorists in the region? Could it get to the point where America needs to deal directly with Iran?
Well, I've written and spoken for a long time saying that at some point the US is going to have to deal with Iran. Iran is the enemy of the US and its allies and of Israel and of various other countries through sponsoring terrorism and supplying arms to groups like Hezbollah and others. I think that Iran would not wish to enter into direct confrontation with the USA and would try to avoid it. But, you know, we've got the US fleet sailing into the Eastern Mediterranean, and it only takes one hothead in Hezbollah to aim a ship-killing missile at the US fleet, and all the bets are off because that missile will undoubtedly have been supplied by Iran.
Is the UK still in a position where it would follow the US into a war in the Middle East?
Well, I think we've always prided ourselves or like to think of ourselves as being the US's closest and most consistent ally. And to a certain extent, we've already done so because Rishi Sunak has ordered 2 Royal Fleet auxiliary ships, which are an accessory to the Royal Navy, into the region to support whatever operations come their way. They're not warships per se. One of them is a logistics supply ship. The other can be used as a temporary hospital. But they have uploaded about 100 Royal Marines, some helicopters, and I've got no doubt that they have some of our special forces on board as well. And also we must remember, Mark, that we have important bases in Cyprus, which isn't that far away from Israel. So we're well placed to support the US and our other allies if push comes to shove.
Lieutenant Colonel, I don't wish to disrespect America, but is the cognitive health of Joe Biden a concern as this crisis deepens?
Well, I think the answer to that is undoubtedly yes. But one hopes that he is surrounded by the right sort of people who can help him make his decisions and help him with his pronouncements and also look after his well-being. He does look slightly tottery in his older age. And, I'm not as young as I used to be either. So there is concern about that. But I think there might be even greater concern should he be replaced in the presidential elections next year by a sort of revanchist Donald Trump, which would bring problems all of its own to the scenario.
And Lieutenant Colonel, finally, why is this conflict an issue and a problem for my viewers and listeners? Why does it matter to Britain?
Well, I would like to think that it matters because Britain, generally speaking, is a force for good in the world. And what is happening in the Middle East and Gaza to particularly innocent civilians on both sides of the divide, if you like, is something that we would not want to tolerate. And so we should go as far as we can in every direction to try and bring this to a halt and make sure that the support and supplies and assistance gets through to those who require it the most. And I think that's a sort of duty that the British public would wish to take on board.
A privilege to have you on the programme, sir, and may I salute you and thank you for your service to this country. Former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, thank you. Coming up, he's been cleared of all charges, but the woke mob are still trying to destroy legendary actor Kevin Spacey, this week cancelling his comeback film from the cinema. GB News superstar Nana Akua makes the case for the Oscar winner's redemption, and she tackles Harry and Meghan's latest eco-hypocrisy. You won't believe the story. But next up in The Clash, as it's revealed a quarter of Brits are now inked. Are visible tattoos in the workplace unprofessional? And frankly, are tattoos common as muck? Kerry Katona takes on Kim Woodburn, 2 classy ladies. They're with us in 2 minutes.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
World War III, is it coming? I certainly hope it is not. Andy says, Mark, as a former soldier, I hope we have another world war. It will reset the world. The weak will die, the strong prevail, and we will rebuild a better world. Well, look, Andy, it's all about opinions. I certainly don't want another war, but you're entitled to share that view. Regarding the COVID inquiry, a top virologist has said that the lockdowns didn't work. There's a surprise. What about this from Charles? Mark, what is your panellist Rebecca on about when she said this new COVID response report was being covered by Sky and The Telegraph on the front pages? I had to check for myself. It is, of course, not. OK, keep those emails coming. GB News star Nana Akua and esteemed journalist Tom Bauer coming up later tonight. But now, The Clash. And a quarter of Brits have tattoos and 11% have visible ones, according to a sensational YouGov poll. Historically, being inked made landing a corporate job difficult, but in recent years, body art has crept into the boardroom and become less taboo in the workplace. In 2022, Virgin Atlantic became the first UK airline to allow crew members to uncover their tattoos on flights, while several police forces have become more permissive as well. But what do you think? Are visible tattoos in the workplace unprofessional? And are tattoos, #common as muck? Let me know your thoughts. You can email me, mark@gbnews.com, tweet us at GBnews, and do vote in the poll. But to debate this, I'm delighted to welcome 2 queens of reality TV, Kim Woodburn, a very good friend of mine, and the marvellous Kerry Katona. Listen, Kim, great to have you back on the show. We'll leave Holly Willoughby to one side for the moment. What do you think about tattoos in the workplace?
You know, look, you can see a pretty little tattoo on somebody's hand, a pretty little thing, and you think it's tattoo, but it's rather nice. But when you see these people tattooed from head to toe, there's no flesh left, my love. They've even had horns put in their head. They've got their tongues split. Who the hell is going to employ them? They're limiting their work, aren't they? For instance, they'd never be able to be a barrister, would they? With the cloak and the wig on, tattooed. You'd never see a doctor like that. You'd never see... I mean, come on. It's unacceptable. And I do take your point. It was considered, and maybe still is now, to be as common as muck, to be absolutely tattooed from top to toe. I think it is as common as muck.
Well, Kerry Katona, you are pure class. You've been on my show before, and it's always a pleasure. But what about those tats? Aren't they a bit, you know...
Tats?
Aren't they a little bit...
about?
Unsophisticated?
You know what? I think in the workforce, I think to a certain extent, Mrs. Woodburn, great to see you. Absolutely love you to bits. I do think if someone's, got horns growing out their head and, it's a bit over the top, absolutely, it's a bit too much. But I tell you something, I think I'd trust a lot more politicians if I saw a few more tattoos on them.
Yeah, well, I just wonder, maybe it would make them more approachable, Kim.
No, but you see, most people that are covered head to toe in tattoos are considered extroverts, aren't they? They know wherever they go, they're going to be stared at. And it makes me wonder, is there something lacking in their life, dear? When they're, and I'll tell you something else. About 2 years ago, there was a man who was tattooed head to toe in a supermarket. And it's terrible, it was horrible. And a little child passed by with its mother and screamed its head off. I thought, well, you do look frightening. So it's not acceptable.
I'm not being funny, but I've seen lots of kids scream at normal people without tattoos.
Well, if they're not, well, what do you mean? When a person is fully covered in tattoos, big red things, earrings on, clips here, this little baby screamed. The person looked horrific. You didn't look and say...
I also think as well, sorry to interrupt, I also think as well, tattoos also represent you as a person. It's almost like saying you can't get hair highlights when you go into work. You can't wear your makeup. To me, I love art. I collect lots of art. My house is full of artwork. I'm really into it. Like this here on my arm, this is my angel of my auntie who passed away. That's a reminder for me. It tells a story. This is about my bipolar and strength, a reminder of me. I have my children tattooed on my wrist as a reminder never to self-harm. There's so much more to a story than somebody just looking for attention. It's always a reminder of where somebody comes from, of who they want to be. And it's like saying to a man, you can't wear makeup. You can't, I don't like the colour of your skin.
However, I just want to ask you, Kerry, whether it's professional. The idea of going to the bank and you sort of signing up for a mortgage and the mortgage advisor is covered in tats. He's got a knuckle and one knuckle says hate, the other knuckle says love.
I'm sorry, that does not make him bad at his job.
But does it inspire confidence? Does it inspire confidence? You want him to be serious in a suit, grown up with a smart haircut like mine.
I'm not being funny, but let's look at all these politicians and all the government. Not one of them have got any... It's all fart brains between the lot of them, and not one of them have got a tattoo, and I've got no confidence in them whatsoever. So maybe if they had a bit more tattoos on them, there's a bit more realistic, a bit more down to earth, maybe then us common folk would trust them a little bit more. But it's not about how you look. It's about how you are as a person from within inside.
Kerry, come on for a minute, will you, please? Can I have a say? You've had to say, just be quiet. I don't like tattoos. You're a pretty woman. Those tattoos on your arm look horrible. And you're a good-looking woman. You look as common as...
I don't like your earrings either, Kim. I don't like your earrings, but that's
Kerry, let Kim speak. Let Kim speak and you can come back. Kim, finish your dressing down of Kerry. We both agree Kerry is a beautiful young woman, but you're not happy with the tattoos.
Kerry brought it up that nothing wrong with tattoos. Kerry's a very pretty girl. Those tattoos on her arm look as common as muck.
Okay,
your opinion of me, Kim, is not my business. You do not define me as a person. So what I want to do with my body...
Let Kerry finish. Kerry, you finish. Sentence I've always wanted to say. Listen, Kim...
Never finishes. She's worse than me. Kerry Lee's filled on her arm. Can she not remember their names?
Right, listen to me.
Ladies, please, one at a time. I'll tell you what's common as muck is interrupting each other. Kerry, make your point, please.
So I've even got what I'm saying because I can't get a word in. I mean, I've got a big list up my left leg of all my exes that I've had crossed out. Now, that is a joke. But what I am saying is, your opinion of me, of how I look and what I put on my body does not define me as a person. It isn't my business what you or anybody or what anybody else thinks of me. What I do with my body is my choice. I thank you for calling me pretty, but this is from my sobriety. This is about how blessed I am and my compass, my moral compass. This is a reminder of my journey, my stretch marks on my body, signatures from my babies. This tells a story of my journey.
Let me tell you, I agree with that, and I've kept my stretch marks as well. I'm very proud of them. Kerry, can I just say I think your tats are lovely. I'm very happy with them. I know Kim doesn't agree. Kim, you're entitled not to agree. Now, listen, Kim, next thing. You are the queen of clean, OK? The star of Channel 4's How Clean Is Your House? Do you think that some people, not Kerry, but some people with loads of tattoos, does it give the impression that they're a bit dirty, a bit unclean?
No, I'm not going to say that, because I don't know about that.
A bit whiffy.
But look, if you want tattoos, you've got your body to have them. You can cover them up with your clothes. People that want to go outside their clothing and put them where they're noticed, all over their face, it looks awful. It looks awful. I'm sorry. And, you know, I mean, Kerry, it's up to what she wants to do. I think for a pretty girl like her, and she's a very gorgeous face, when she lifts that arm up, I think, yuck!
But listen, what about the memories?
But it's like art, isn't it? It's if you go into an art gallery, your piece of art that you like might not like me. You know, I might prefer that piece of artwork or that piece of artwork, and that's what it's all about. It's all about individuality and non-judgmental.
Kerry,
sorry,
it's hanging on a wall piece of art, dear, not stuck on someone's face. You're going off the boil.
Well,
I love mine.
I wondered now whether I could actually make a personal confession, because I went to a tattoo parlour earlier today, and I do hope Mrs. Dolan doesn't mind, but I had this made. All right, and it says Kim with a big love heart on it. And then tomorrow, I'm going to get Kerry on the other side to keep both of you happy.
It won't make you happy. You look the right dope. And you ruined your hands.
We love you, Kim.
Listen, I tell you what, I'm going to get visited in the dead of night by Mr. Woodburn with a shotgun, most likely. I did want Kim forever, but there wasn't enough space on my hands. Listen, Kim, brilliant to have you back on the show.
Very much. Those tattoos are shocking.
OK, there you go.
That's
Listen,
all right. I don't like
Kim,
your earrings either.
Kim is not pulling her bunches. Listen, Kerry, we love you loads. Don't change a thing. You're fabulous.
Never.
And so is Kim, and it's all about opinions. Your reaction, please, mark@gbnews.com. I mean, I think it's quite clear that I lost control of that piece of television. But what can you do? It's live telly, innit, folks? Welcome to GB News. Marcus on Twitter says, tattoos are not my personal cup of tea, but I prefer to judge a person by their actions, not by their appearance. Sean says tattoos are disgusting, especially on the neck or right down both arms. Don't understand why anyone would want to be covered in ink. Tony says, my surgeon had tattoos, but my tumour didn't care. Nor do I 20 years later. Well, the verdict is in. 65% agree that tattoos in the workplace are unprofessional. 35% say they are OK. Coming up, after sending billions to Ukraine, can Britain afford to support Israel? And should ordinary Brits be urged to take in refugees from the conflict? My panel debate that later tonight. But next, he's been cleared of all charges. But the woke mob are still trying to destroy the legendary actor Kevin Spacey, this week cancelling his comeback film from the cinema. GB News superstar Nana Akua makes the case for the Oscar winner's redemption. Plus, you'll love this. She tackles Harry and Meghan's latest incredible example of eco-hypocrisy. You won't believe that story. That is next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7pm.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6pm, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11pm for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11pm every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are tattoos in the workplace unprofessional? A massive reaction on email, getting hundreds of emails. Sally, hi Mark, I think tattoos and piercings are a sign of mental illness and are a form of self-harm. James says, those 2 dreadful screaming women lower the tone of GB News. Get them off! Mark, says James, tattoos indicate gross stupidity and moronity. I employed hundreds of men in several countries. Not one had tattoos or piercings. Pauline, Mark, these 2, Kim and Kerry, you said classy women. Sorry, they're a pair of banshees. Absolutely horrible. Scraping the bottom of the barrel more like. Your viewers and listeners will be appalled by their behaviour. Well, look, it's all about opinions. Keep yours coming, Mark, at gbnews.com. Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey was given a standing ovation at an Oxford University cancel culture lecture in his first public appearance since being cleared of sexual assault earlier this year. The former House of Cards star performed a 5-minute scene from William Shakespeare's Timon of Athens and was introduced to the audience by conservative commentator Douglas Murray, who said Shakespeare could teach us all about the scourge of cancel culture. This is the moment that Kevin Spacey lapped up the adoring crowd last night. Kevin Spacey's public resurgence comes despite a West End theatre refusing to host his first film since his sex assault trial, ignoring the fact that he's been cleared of all charges. Now, listen, folks, let me talk about this for a second. This is the clown world that we now inhabit. That Kevin Spacey, an Oscar-winning actor, House of Cards, all those amazing films that he's made, unfounded allegations, which he's been completely found not guilty of, and the guy's career is over. That is, in my view, a double cancellation. Delighted to say that Nana Akua joins us now. Nana, great to have you on the show, of course. We know that you are uncancelable, aren't you?
Well, of course, you can't cancel me. I keep coming back. I'm just unflushable.
Unflushable, I think that's harsh language, but I hear what you're saying. Nana, this is a really awful story and a tragedy for Kevin Spacey, who should be back on the big screen.
Well, actually, it's a bit silly, really. I mean, okay, so this is this cinema in Leicester Square. It's like the Prince Charles Cinema. It is actually just a premiere of this film called Control, and they didn't realise he was in it. But when they found out he was in it, then they decided that, oh, well, no, we can't have the premiere there. But the irony here is he's not actually in the film. It's just his voice. So they've cancelled a film that his voice is on because of some allegations that he was found to be innocent of. Now, this is really absurd. For starters, who allowed them to be judge and jury over this? And secondly, he's not been found guilty. So he's innocent. So why are they doing this?
Indeed so. And this is why I think, Nana, that wokeism must be destroyed. I know you absolutely go about that. You demolish woke madness every Saturday and Sunday from 3 till 6. You are the enemy of the woke, I would argue, its greatest nemesis. And the reason it's got to be stopped is that these people are toxic bullies. They're destroying the film industry. They're destroying comedy. They're destroying the world of music. And the thing is, they don't just want to cancel you. They want to destroy your life.
Well, I mean, it wasn't long ago when we had the pandemic that nobody was going to the cinema and these businesses were all falling apart, and these people working in these places would have been happy for anybody to show up. And now they've got a premiere. They're deciding that they're going to choose who their customers are based on what? On something where the person has been found innocent. Even if the person has been found guilty, it's not for them to decide. We have a legal system and a court system that determines what the punishment will be. And I think these sort of people kind of have gone way above their station. I mean, who are? It's the staff won't work because if Kevin Spacey's voice is on the film, then they won't be. They should be thankful that they are working and that people are interested in film. And people like Kevin Spacey, who is an Oscar-winning actor, by the way, who has been found innocent of all charges, there literally is no justification for their behaviour. I find it astonishing. And actually, they do. So, I mean, he should come down on them like a ton of bricks. It's not acceptable.
Indeed. Listen, I think people power will win out. The minute that one of Kevin Spacey's films actually gets onto Netflix or something else, the numbers will go through the roof. You know that, Nana. Disney, all their woke movies, bombing at the box office. Now, moving on, Nana, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have found themselves back in the headlines after being papped, arriving at an exclusive Caribbean island after a gas-guzzling private jet flight. Can you believe it, Nana? Pictures from the Mail Online show Harry and Meghan on the tarmac after jetting to the tiny island in St Vincent and the Grenadines, said to be where billionaires get away from millionaires. So is this eco-hypocrisy again?
Well, I mean, they're at it again, aren't they? To be honest, I'm actually quite happy to see them holding hands, looking happy, and not whinging. I'm fed up of listening to their whinging. So finally, they're holding hands. They look like they want to be around each other. That's great. But it just keeps coming back to me that the moment I decided that I'd had enough of the pair was when Meghan and Harry were banging on about climate change and explaining how they're going to offset their carbon. And we all know that carbon offsetting is sort of a bit of a scam, really. It's not real. And we know that they've got one, like I think it's a Bombardier jet that they have. I don't know whether it was theirs or Tyler Perry's or whoever it was. But this island is known to have people like Leonardo DiCaprio coming to it. And there they are on this private jet going to the exclusive island. And it's, you know, I'm glad they're happy. It's nice to see them holding hands and being friendly. But frankly, I don't want to hear another word from them about climate change.
That's exactly right. They've got more air miles than the Wright brothers. There's one for the teenagers. Nana, briefly, if you can, pop star Alicia Keys has been slammed online for allegedly mocking the Israeli terror attack victims with this social media post where she wears a jacket resembling Palestinian colours while suggesting to her followers that she'll take up paragliding. Do you believe that she didn't mean anything by it? She said, oh, it's got nothing to do with Israel.
I love Alicia Keys. I don't know what she was thinking of there. Either it's very misguided thing, or she knew what she was doing. I want to think that she didn't know what she was doing. She's apologised later on social media, but frankly, you know, she needs to be a bit more savvy than that. Who would want to talk about how great paragliding is, having seen what has happened in Israel and how these people, these terrorists, Hamas terrorists, managed to evade Israeli defences to come through and murder over 1,000 people. I mean, innocent people who had nothing to do with any sort of thing, peaceful people, kids, children, grandchildren, babies. I mean, you know, I don't know what she was thinking. I really pray that she's being sincere, but I don't know why she was wearing those colours, mentioning paragliding. I hope she was being sincere when she said that she didn't realise, and it's got nothing to do with it.
People, Nana, people have been cancelled for less, haven't they? Can't wait to see you on Saturday at 3, the brilliant Nana Akua. Coming up, as biological males are allowed to participate in a dangerous martial art, could this trans madness see a woman die in the ring? Sharon Davies is coming up shortly. And can Britain afford to support Israel? See you shortly.
Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The storm system has yet to fully arrive, but once it does, it's going to drop a lot of rain between now and the weekend. Storm Babette is brewing down to the southwest, initially throwing rain up across the south during Wednesday, but then continuing to track northwards and kind of becoming slow moving on Wednesday night over Northern Ireland, Northern England, and then into parts of eastern Scotland, where we have an amber warning in place, but we have yellow warnings across a good part of the UK. Keep up to date with those weather warnings through the Met Office website. Back to tonight, and some rain across parts of Northern Ireland. May turn a little heavy later in the night, but for many it'll be a dry night. The winds continuing to strengthen, and with a lot more cloud, it'll be a much milder night compared to recent nights across Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland. And for many, Wednesday will still be a dry and a bright day. Northern England to Eastern England, good part of Scotland staying dry, but there'll be showery rain over the Midlands, Wales and Southern England. That's going to pep up as we go through the day. Could turn pretty heavy during Wednesday evening across the south, with a strengthening gusty wind as well. Wet and windy weather also working towards Northern Ireland, so some heavy bursts likely here through Wednesday evening. Temperatures into the teens, even the high teens in the south, but not feeling very warm with the wet and windy weather, which continues through Wednesday night. And then on Thursday, grinds to a halt across eastern Scotland, hence why we have that amber warning in place here, but there'll still be heavy showers elsewhere as well.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Lovely to have your company. Now, don't forget, you can interact with the show, mark@gbnews.com, and you can have a look at my big opinion, which is now on Twitter, courtesy of Joe. In our digital team, it's all about a bombshell piece of news that COVID lockdowns, according to a top Sage expert, did not work. There's a surprise. Anyway, a very busy hour to come. Let's get cracking. It is 10 o'clock. I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News Tonight. We've sent billions to Ukraine and are already dealing with the never-ending channel crisis. So can Britain afford to support Israel in its fight with terrorism? And should ordinary Brits open their homes to Palestinian refugees? That's the big debate next with my top pundits this evening. Esther McVeigh, Derek Lord, rocking a brand new microphone and a very smart suit, and a good friend of mine, Rebecca Reed. And with Israel inexplicably being attacked for defending itself, is the terror group Hamas winning the PR battle? And is their stance on Israel causing permanent damage to the BBC? One of Britain's best journalists, Tom Bauer, gives his expert take in Uncancelled live in the studio later. Also this hour, as biological males are allowed to participate in the martial art of jiu-jitsu against females, could this trans madness see a woman die in the ring? Women's rights advocate and British Olympic hero Sharon Davies is here with her forensic assessment shortly. And as two people this week receive huge payouts for hurt feelings at work, is Britain the snowflake capital of the world? My panel will share their own hurty feelings on that when they debate it in the media buzz. Pop star Madonna is Marmite for some, but will Madge take a gong when she's nominated in tonight's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass? Find out before the end of the show. Plus, tomorrow's front pages, a really busy hour to come. Can Britain afford to support Israel? That's next. First, the news and Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you and good evening to you. Well, let's tell you more about that hospital that has been bombed in Gaza City tonight. We can tell you that in the last half hour, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has blamed what he calls barbaric terrorists for the attack on the hospital in Gaza, which we believe has left about 500 people dead. Israeli intelligence has also said it was caused by a failed rocket attack on Israel by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group. Officials in Gaza, though, blame Israel for the airstrike. And the Palestinian president has declared 3 days of mourning. Thousands were seeking shelter at the Baptist Hospital in the centre of Gaza City. It is now in flames. Survivors are being pulled out of the hospital and transferred to nearby medical facilities. The World Health Organization has reacted tonight, condemning the explosion, calling it unprecedented. And in response, Palestinians have been clashing with security forces in Ramallah in the West Bank. The Israeli ambassador to the UK, Zippy Hotovely, responded to the news of the hospital attack on GBNews tonight.
This is a war that Hamas started from this horrible massacre that happened in October 7th. I think everyone is still shocked in this country, in Israel and around the world from the atrocities were exposed that Hamas did. And as we speak, there are still 199 Israelis, including children and Holocaust survivors, grandparents, that are kept hostage in Hamas hands. I want to check what happened, but I'm sure and I can guarantee you we never target civilians.
Well, also in the news today, a British-Israeli teenager who's been missing since last weekend's terror attacks by Hamas has been confirmed dead. 13-year-old Rachel Yahel and her mother Liane were both killed when gunmen attacked their kibbutz last weekend. Her sister Noya and their father Eli are both still missing. And here the Prime Minister has called for the immediate release of hostages taken by Hamas. In news away from Israel, the return of Islamist terrorism poses a threat to all European nations. That's according to the French President Emmanuel Macron today. His comments came a day after 2 Swedish football fans were shot dead in a terrorist attack in Brussels before Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier against Sweden last night. Belgium's police say the suspect, who identified himself online immediately after the attack as a member of Islamic State, was killed this morning. And the Scottish First Minister is pledging £300 million to cut NHS waiting lists in Scotland. Humza Yousaf told the SNP conference in Aberdeen it could reduce waiting lists by 100,000 patients by 2026. He also pledged to freeze council tax in Scotland next year. And the First Minister, who has family in Gaza, is calling on the international community to set up a refugee programme for those fleeing from the Gaza Strip. That's the news. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
My thanks to the brilliant Polly Middlehurst, who returns in an hour's time. Tomorrow's news tonight in our Media Buzz. Let's kick off with a first look at tomorrow's front pages. And for now, we'll just start with the Metro. Gaza hostage ordeal, bring my baby home. The mother of a hostage filmed by Hamas begging for her life after being taken at a music festival has pleaded for the world to help bring her home. Bring you more front pages shortly, but reacting to the big stories of the day, we have former Cabinet Minister, GB News star Esther McVey, banker and visiting professor Derek Lord, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. Now, as the war between Israel and Hamas deepens, Britain has found itself swept up in the conflict, with Rishi Sunak yesterday confirming that at least 6 Brits are missing and 10 already dead. And with Israeli troops massed on the border and poised to invade Gaza, the US today announced that 2,000 American troops will be put on immediate standby for deployment. But with the British government having already spent over £4 billion supporting Ukraine, can we afford to support Israel? What do you think, Derek?
Well, in simple terms, we obviously cannot. We've got a big national debt. It's costing us about £9 billion a day to service that debt. The projections are that we will not...
£9 million pounds.
Nine, yeah, that's right.
I was thinking inflation's bad, but not that bad.
Yes, not yet. But I think that the projections are that we will not get out of the national debt crisis until about 2057 or something of that kind. Rishi Sunak this week pledged about 4.2 billion to Israel in terms of aid. It is clearly not sustainable, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to do it, because we've actually got a government that actually is the government of public spending, and they don't seem to mind how much of our money they spend on either overseas aids or other public policy.
Did you support the decision by Rishi Sunak to keep that aid percentage lower than it was before the pandemic?
Well, what the Conservative Party did under David Cameron was that they used overseas aid to decontaminate the Conservative Party brand.
Right. So it's a PR exercise.
PR exercise, and it still remains important to them.
OK, now, Rebecca, what do you think? Can Britain afford to support Israel?
I mean, I'm not so big on the numbers, but I don't really care if we can afford to or not. We are part of the problem. Part of the reason that this situation exists is because of the way that we handled things after the Second World War. We involved ourselves. We didn't do a brilliant job, neither did America, but we were instrumental in this problem. And that's true of us with a lot of countries. But this is true in, like, some people who survive a lifetime. And I'm horrified by everything on both sides, absolutely. But I think we have a real commitment and a relationship with Israel. And I think also they are people whose values are very aligned with ours. They are people who we owe a great deal to. So I think we have to find a way to help. In an ideal world, it would be better to try and sort out... Peace in the Middle East would be lovely. It's a stupid thing to say because it's so obvious. In an ideal world, it would be better to be able to solve the situation without having to bring people here, because this is a place these people live. It's their homes. But we have to do something because we helped create this problem.
Well, bring people here is an interesting point, Esther. Since the start of the war, at least 600,000 people have fled the north of Gaza, which has prompted both Egypt and Jordan to rule out taking in any refugees. But speaking at the SNP party conference today, Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf called for a refugee scheme. Take a listen.
In the past, people in Scotland and across the UK have opened our hearts and our homes. We've welcomed those from Syria, from Ukraine and many other countries. Conference, we must do so again. I'm calling today on the international community to commit to a worldwide refugee programme for the people of Gaza.
Is that the way to go, Esther? Do you think that ordinary Brits, should take in people caught up in the Gaza crisis?
I think we've got to be very honest at the housing shortage we have in the UK. Some people are saying we're 4 million homes short, and in quick succession. We've helped people from Hong Kong and Syria and Afghanistan and Ukraine. So really, I would not be saying that we can be accepting more people into the UK. Of course, people need to help out, and I think he was calling for international support. So you would say, where is closer to home? So you would say Egypt, somewhere with, close to home, with more land. But if you just think how many people we've got here at the moment, where are we going to home people? So I would say, let's look for somewhere closer.
But it's not really about
Gaza and not here.
Rebecca?
It's not really about closer. It's usually about where you speak the language, where you have a connection, where you have family. So if God forbid something like this happened here, I would want to go ideally to New York because I know people there.
Rebecca,
I have
you say it's not close, but that wasn't true with Ukraine, was it? So a lot of people went to Poland. A lot of people went to somewhere that was closer. A lot of people came here.
Yes,
I know, but the vast majority went to somewhere that's closer. And I'm saying,
they have connections.
So how about all the
there?
people who are already here, who we cannot home and house?
That sounds like another problem for the Tory government to sort out. Absolutely, I think that is a disgrace. I think the housing crisis of the Tories is a disaster. I agree.
Okay, one at a time. Derek.
I think refugee international law says it should be the safest place.
First safe country.
First safe country.
But after the Second World War, that's not what happened.
Well, I'm not talking about the Second World War.
We're talking
2023. So that's irrelevant. Esther's absolutely right. I mean, we can't afford to take these people, I'm afraid. The scale of the problem is potentially enormous. There are about 2.4 million Arabs that actually live in Israel. There are 9 million of the 16 million Jews in the world that live in Israel.
And can I also ask a question? Who is it that's asking to move to different parts of the world? I'm not saying Israelis asking. It's seeming that they would like to remain where they are. Are we saying it is the people from Gaza?
Predominantly.
Precisely. And that's why I'd say Egyptians somewhere closer to
Jordan.
Well, if you have a shared faith,
Jordan.
If you have a shared faith, then a country that shares that faith is probably a better place for you to be.
Would be Jordan and Egypt.
But if you are Israeli and you are Jewish, then going to live in a Muslim country might not feel like a very safe or comfortable thing for you. Some people are.
The only thing I would say is that the population of Gaza is about 2 million. Of that population, 50% under 15. So there'll be a lot of people with parents, and I think that we would have to find a way. And I actually see this I frame this as a Western problem, but I frame it as a US problem in particular. And they should be responsible, and their £44.2 billion of aid should be associated with a safe passage for people from Gaza.
Should we not ask, why does Egypt and Jordan maybe not want some of those people come into their country, Rebecca? And why are you saying that you'd want them in the UK?
Because they're behaving unbelievably poorly. I think it is disgusting that they aren't.
Another question about if people from Gaza come, for example, to the UK. Hamas, it's debated how much support Hamas have in Gaza. They are the governing authority of Gaza. But upwards of 50% of residents do support Hamas. Do we want to accommodate those people?
No, I don't want anybody living here who thinks that Hamas is great, and that includes people who are born here.
And how do you ascertain that?
And I'm surrounded by people who are born here, who are white British, who think that Hamas are brilliant, and I think we need to have a much bigger conversation about how we sort that out. Because that is a hideous situation.
But that's why I asked, why, if Egypt and Jordan don't want them, why are you so happy to have them? And this is the point. How do you separate?
Because I would love children not to die.
Anyway, in the end, the most important thing that has to be discussed, and it's the most urgent thing, is how do we bring about a ceasefire? And our international leadership has been weak at discussing this first. They always...
You can't negotiate with terrorists. That's a direct quote from Margaret Thatcher.
But if you don't negotiate, then what are we going to do?
It is a direct quote by Margaret Thatcher, but that's exactly what we ended up doing in Northern Ireland.
But I also think a lot of negotiations are going on behind the scenes because you haven't seen that ground invasion yet.
Exactly.
You haven't seen people moving yet, because I think this diplomacy, I think this security, I think this intelligence, I think this pressure from America and UK is happening, and I think those negotiations are going ahead.
Someone that won't negotiate is the former president. Do you remember this guy, Donald J. Trump?
And in my second term, we're going to expand each and every one of those bans because we have no choice. Some very rough people, some very, very rough people come out of those areas. They want to blow up our country. We aren't bringing in anyone from Gaza, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, or Libya.
OK, now, Derek, you were about to comment, and I'll come to you, Rebecca.
I was going to say Nelson Mandela was described on the floor of the House of Commons as a terrorist. Gandhi was described as a terrorist, you know, and it didn't take long before both were welcomed at Buckingham Palace.
But are Hamas not beyond redemption?
Well, I think all terrorists are beyond redemption. But I
think we should just be very clear here. Hamas are beyond redemption and Hamas are terrorists. And any organisation that is not using that language around them is failing everybody.
Including the BBC?
Including the BBC, absolutely. I think it's disgraceful that they haven't.
A rare moment of agreement from my pundits tonight. There you go. Listen, it is all about opinions, and let me know yours, mark at gbnews.com. Now, it was the battle of the wags that gripped the nation. A heady mix of showbiz, football and some good old detective work gave the nation Wagatha Christie. And now Colleen Rooney is telling her side of the story in a new Disney Plus documentary, Ka-Ching Ka-Ching, which comes out tomorrow. Here's the trailer.
Wagatha Christie starts today at the High Court.
Fellow wags and former friends embroiled in a bitter row.
Someone on my personal account was informing the Sun newspaper of my private posts and stories. I thought, I'm going to do something about it.
This is a detective story. You never find the person responsible with a smoking gun in her hand. She was going to lose at trial.
I needed evidence. I had to set a trap.
If that was anything to go by, here's hoping Vardy and Rooney don't agree to forgive and forget anytime soon. Now, coming up, as an increasing number of Brits receive huge payouts for injuries to feelings in the workplace and elsewhere, is Britain now the undisputed snowflake capital of the world? Why are we so sensitive? My pundits will debate that shortly, and they've all got rhino skins, let me tell you. Especially Esther. Bulletproof. But next up, with biological males now allowed to participate in the martial art of jiu-jitsu against females, could the incessant march of trans madness see a woman die in the ring? Olympic medalist and women's rights warrior Sharon Davies hits back. She's next, and she's not happy.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians
to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Should Britain take in refugees from Gaza? Big opinions on this. Sue says, dear Mark, every Gaza refugee should be sent to the many Muslim countries that surround Gaza. Please do not bring them here to the UK. You can never change the belief that Hamas has on the West. We have imported terrorists for a number of years. The UK is beyond repair, says Sue. But Ian says, dear GB News, do you not know Egypt is not refusing anyone? The larger issue is Israel controls entry into Gaza, and if they leave, they may not be allowed back in. Therefore, Palestinians probably won't want to leave. And Eric says we should welcome people who face possible death. There you go. It's all about opinions. Keep them coming. Mark at gbnews.com. Lovely to have your company. Tom Bauer on the way. But first, I'm joined by Olympic medalist and women's rights warrior Sharon Davies. And the British governing body of the martial arts sport Jiu-Jitsu has been forced into a humiliating backtrack after tennis legend and women's rights campaigner Martina Navratilova blasted their decision to allow trans athletes to compete against female athletes, calling it unconscionable. The British Jiu-Jitsu Association have since announced a review of their trans inclusion policy. It comes after US podcaster and UFC commentator Joe Rogan had this warning about people who are biological males identifying as females doing combat sport. Take a watch.
Imagine if the UFC had to have diversity. Do you know what a problem that would be?
Yeah.
We had to have a certain amount of trans folks. You had numbers you had to achieve. It wasn't the best fighters.
Yeah.
It was just, who meets certain criteria. There's going to be a bunch of people that get murdered.
Sharon, wonderful to have you back on the show. So in combat and heavy contact sports, a biological man that identifies as female could potentially injure or indeed kill a woman in the sporting arena.
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening to you and to everybody in the studio. And that's kind of the point. Men kick 50% harder and they hit 160% harder. They punch 160% harder. And that's of equal weight, okay? So that's not someone bigger, that's someone of exactly the same weight. So in a contact sport, it literally is a serious injury waiting to happen. And jiu-jitsu isn't the only one. I mean, in this country, we have aikido, fencing, karate, taekwondo, and, would you believe it, wrestling is also enabling males to actually fight females. I mean, it's just madness. It literally is a serious accident waiting to happen. And the government and UK sport have said you can't have inclusion and fairness and safety. Safety must come first, fairness needs to come second, and then we must find ways to be inclusive. I think what's really also very interesting is that World Boxing is one of the associations that have said no. And the reason they said no was because men said they would not fight females, so they would not fight women who identified as men, because they will then get done for manslaughter when someone gets killed.
Yeah, too right.
So I mean, we know this, and it's just so frustrating that we have to work so hard to get these governing bodies to just do the right thing.
Well, Sharon, I feel I'm living in a parallel universe. The idea that a biological man, fully intact normally, could be allowed to wrestle in a ring with a woman and then pick up a trophy, win a belt and possibly kill the poor woman. I can't believe I'm saying these words. So, listen, let's talk about what's behind this, Sharon. Biological men participating in female sport is a very strange hill to die on. This is clearly the trans lobby overplaying their hands. Is this the moment at which the public say enough is enough?
The situation has been sort of reversed, though. So what happened in 2015 was that the IOC changed the rules, and then every governing body just went with it. So instead of turning around and going, well, where's the evidence? You know, show us the scientific proof that we can remove male puberty advantage, of which there's none. There's not a single study in the world that can show that, whereas there's 19 studies that show the opposite. They just went with it. So now what's happened is it's taken us 8 years to claw our way back, you know, to world swimming, to world athletics, to world cycling. What else have we got? We've got rugby and we've got boxing. But every other sport, and in the UK, that's 60 other sports at the moment do not protect the female classification. And that includes things like football, cricket and tennis. And we've had injuries in football and cricket. You know, we've had a young girl who's been very badly injured when a fully blown male was bowling a ball at them. So I just don't understand why we have to get to a point where people have to get hurt before we use common sense.
Well, indeed, if it's swimming like your sport, then it's just unfair. But if it's boxing or if it's rugby or wrestling or jiu-jitsu, it's bloody dangerous. I guess the trans extremists will always insist on biological men in women's sport, Sharon, because if not, it challenges the idea that you can change your sex. That's why they won't let it go. It kills the fiction that they're peddling.
Do you know what's really fascinating, Mark, was that World Aquatics turned around when they changed the rule last year and said we're going to protect the female category and said, OK, let's create an inclusion event, a special inclusion event at the World Cup in Berlin, which was at the beginning of this month, and we will have a trans event and we will, you know, go out of our way to make sure that everyone is included. Guess how many people entered?
Go on.
None.
No.
None. Not a single one.
The world's gone mad. Listen, Sharon.
They want to be in the women's races where they can win, and that's the thing which is unfair.
What about the sort of counter-argument that actually the idea of letting biological males who identify as female into women's sport is a way of acknowledging how they identify? That's tied in with their mental health. Trans people are very badly treated in society. This is just a policy of being inclusive.
Yeah, and absolutely. And we can do that. You know, I don't understand why we can't be inclusive with people identifying however they like. And actually, in most women's sport, particularly in the States, we've had many transgender men, so that's biological females, who identify as being male. They're not on testosterone, but they still go and race with the women. And the women have no problem with it. So if the women can have no problem with it, why can't the men have no problem with the reverse situation?
Too right. Sharon Davies, you remain my total hero. Keep up the good work and keep fighting the fight.
Thank you.
Now, the British Jiu-Jitsu Association, easy for you to say, have said the British Jiu-Jitsu Association governing body adopted a policy in an attempt to be inclusive and fair. That policy has never needed to be implemented at our national championships, as we've not had a trans competitor seeking to participate. However, we've now identified that the information that our policy was based on has been superseded, and as a result, we're now conducting an urgent review of our trans inclusion policy so that it reflects the current thinking. Would you like to know what I think about this? I don't think that biological men should even be participating in female tiddlywinks. Take that, shove it in your pipe and smoke it all day long. Coming up in Uncancelled, as Israel is inexplicably attacked simply for defending itself, is the terror group Hamas winning the PR battle? Author and former BBC reporter Tom Bauer is live in the studio. Plus, he's got some harsh words for the BBC. You won't want to miss it. But next in a media buzz, with offended Brits now receiving financial payouts for injury to feelings, has Britain become the snowflake capital of the world? We'll debate that next with three completely oversensitive ninnies. I'll see you in two.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, plenty more to come. Let's return to tomorrow's news tonight in our media buzz, and more front pages have been delivered. We'll start with the I newspaper, and they lead with the following headline: hundreds killed sheltering at hospital as Israel denies airstrike. Where should we go next? Let's have the Daily Mail. Hospital horror, who's to blame? Amid scenes of devastation, Gaza officials claim Israeli airstrike on hospital killed at least 500, but Israel insists the blast was caused by a misfired rocket from jihadi militants. Guardian now: hundreds feared dead in Gaza hospital strike. And the Telegraph: Biden visits Israel as hundreds die in Gaza hospital. There you go. Joe Biden flies into the region. Exactly what they need. MI5 warns of UK terror threat from Iran. Another sobering headline in tomorrow's papers. Now, journalistic legend Tom Bower in the studio with harsh words for the BBC in just a few minutes, but reacting to the big stories of the day. My top pundits this evening: former Cabinet Minister, no less, GB News presenter, also deputy in the Whip's office. I thought she absolutely smashed that role. Apparently no one said no to the McVeigh. And we have banker and visiting professor Derek Lord and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. Now, the term injury to feelings may be new to you, but it looks like it can win you a fortune from your employer if you play your cards right. In Kingston, southwest London, a trans woman this week successfully sued the local council for which she worked, being awarded £21,000 for injury to feelings. The claimant said the stress of being dead named forced her to take 6 months off sick leave after it took 2 years to register their new female name on employment records and security passes. Meanwhile, in Wales, a new auditing report has found that the National Museum of Wales may have broken the law after paying its former boss £50,000, again due to injury for feelings as part of a settlement made in December last year. So as two employees receive massive payouts for basically made to feel sad and unhappy, is Britain now the snowflake capital of the world? Rebecca?
I don't think that two people in two different companies in quite different years in different parts of the country being put together into one illustration of the same thing is helpful, especially because on the latter, we don't know what happened.
How dare you point out the weakness of this story?
So sorry.
Can you stop being truthful?
It is why they asked me here. I am sorry, though. But on the second one, we don't know what happened, so I think I'm not necessarily sure that we can comment, because it might be... It's very possible that there was quite a long, complicated story and it's been put down as, like, hurt feelings as a generic umbrella term. On the trans thing, that's more complicated because it is something that we're seeing more often in workplaces, that there's a clash of ideologies, that some people believe you can change sex, some people believe you can't, and you're asking somebody to adhere to a belief that they don't share in order to make the other person feel safe in their workplace. And that can be a movable force or stoppable object.
Rebecca's giving this too much respect. It's absolute bunkum.
I hope you weren't going to say bollocks.
I was not going to say
Good, because we can't have that.
And I'm going to actually take this head on, because actually the thing that is very interesting about both of them, which I think signals something going on in the world generally speaking, is this compensation culture. That's what it's all about. And the other thing that worries me about this particular story, the first one that relates to the transgender, is that she claims that she was really deeply offended by her name not being adjusted for 2 years. But of course, she was still being paid. It didn't affect her in that way. And so offended, of course, was she about the fact that her new name wasn't being used. In the legal documents, she's referred to as Miss AB, not by her real name. So if she was...
But is that not to protect her anonymity?
Well, why should she have anonymity?
Because she's legally entitled to it, and also because trans people do receive a lot of hate crimes in this country. And
you see, I do think people like to be victims now. I do think people are offended one way or another, or offended by maybe what other people are doing. I think things have changed significantly, what you can say in the office, what you can't say, what you could do, what you couldn't do. So I think things have fundamentally changed. And I think now people setting up a business will sometimes think, gosh, is it worth the hassle? What can I or what can't I do?
But people
and the law doesn't seem to be on your side.
Should tribunals be legislating for hurt feelings? I think that if you've been unfairly dismissed, you should pursue compensation. But why is the idea of hurt feelings a factor?
Because if you are genuinely being bullied in the workplace, which does happen...
Not being bullied, it's a human mistake. People make human errors.
2 years of not changing something on the system when somebody is actively asking for it is not a human mistake. That is a deliberate oversight. Are you telling me that people who changed their married name in that office didn't have their names changed? Are you telling me that nobody else had their name changed in 2 years in that office?
I would also say that other people in department haven't had, whether it was somebody's passed away and they haven't, maybe the husband, and letters still keep coming through. Also, people who, by mistake, have actually been found as if they're no longer existing when they actually are. And I don't think they've been paid out by £25,000. Yes, and it has gone on for some time.
And if she was really wanting to be a ground... If she was also wanting to be a groundbreaker and actually leading by example, she would have actually waived her anonymity as well.
But it is here, Mark. Rebecca doesn't believe it, but snowflakes are.
All right, well, listen, folks, back to me, Alistair. Have you been upset and offended by what you've just heard? If so, write to me in confidence, mark@gbnews.com. Coming up, which of Britain's devolved parliaments is now being deprived of the opportunity to watch Britain's fastest-growing news channel? We've got bad news for politicians west of Shropshire, as I crown tonight's Greatest Britain and Union jackass. But next, in Uncancelled, with Israel inexplicably being attacked for defending itself after its civilians were slain, is the terror group Hamas winning the PR battle? And is the BBC's refusal to label Hamas as terrorists doing permanent damage to their journalistic reputation? Esteemed author and ex-BBC reporter Tom Bauer joins us live in the studio. He's next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to the show. It is time now for Uncancelled with esteemed author and former BBC reporter Tom Bauer. Now, the Israel-Hamas war has led to widespread condemnation of prescribed terror group Hamas, but not everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet. Watch as elected British MPs shamelessly attacked Israel in Parliament yesterday, simply for defending itself against Hamas's slaughter of 1,300 Israeli civilians just 10 days ago.
Food, electricity, water, medicines, all cut off. Such collective punishment is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions.
The targeted killing of civilians, whether Israeli or Palestinian, must be condemned, as must the kidnapping of hostages. The civilians of Gaza should not be made to pay the price for the atrocities of Hamas.
Will the Prime Minister make it clear to the Israeli government that laying siege to civilians in Gaza by cutting food, water, power and medical supplies and indiscriminate airstrikes killing civilians is in clear violation of international law?
Why is Israel the only country in the world that gets attacked for being attacked? Shocking new YouGov statistics from the top polling site has revealed that just 41% of 18 to 24-year-olds in Britain think Hamas is a terrorist group, despite being prescribed as such by the British government and widely reported as such by plenty of news outlets, though not the BBC. I'm delighted to say that Tom Bauer joins me now. Tom, lovely to have you in the studio. I wish I met you under happier circumstances. Are Hamas winning the PR battle in this war?
I'm afraid they are. And tonight, above all, I mean, what is remarkable is that, given what the horror that happened on that Saturday in Israel, Hamas is winning, because immediately Israel retaliates, then that Hamas wins, because that was the whole idea of the massacre on that Saturday in the kibbutz and the rest in southern Israel, was to create the circumstances where Israel would have to retaliate and then would be accused of killing innocent women and children.
Israel is the bad guy and the imperial colonial power.
Absolutely. And what was really the most horrible part of all this is, it was Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party that legitimised anti-Zionism and stroke anti-Semitism when he was leader of the Labour Party. He made it legitimate and respectable for people to come out and say the Jews are terrible and equate Jews with Israel and everything else. And Hamas tonight with the bombing, or it wasn't the bombing, let us see what actually happened. But of course the whole thing about Hamas is that it uses hospitals as shelters, as bases for assembling their weapons, for causing the terrorism and organising it. And that explosion in the hospital looked very much like a local explosion to me, not something as a result of a strike. So it could well be a Hamas ammunition dump that went up. We don't know. But instantly, the BBC reports it as an airstrike by Israel. On their way here tonight, the BBC reporter from Jerusalem, Bateman, says we shouldn't trust the Israeli explanation because you can never trust the Israelis. And so it goes on. And they bring out the priest whose church it is, the Baptist church in Gaza, the hospital in Gaza, who says that it's an Israeli strike. And that is it. The whole time, the BBC is setting the tone of the Israelis are to blame. And the point about the cutting off of fuel and water and that, well, I've heard it's all been cut off for 4 or 5 days now, and it's still carrying on. There doesn't seem to be a shortage. And nobody says that the reason there's no water in Gaza, which has been independent since 2005, is because Hamas hasn't built water supplies. There's no power because Hamas uses the money to build weapons and doesn't build a power station. Nobody reports that, at least the BBC.
Indeed, and actually a blockade would play into Hamas's hands.
Well, it's what they wanted.
Yeah. Will we ever get to the truth of this most recent developing story, the tragedy of a hospital blown up? And I understand that one particular terror cell is headquartered in the basement of one of these hospitals. I don't know if it's the same hospital. 300 people have perished. It's a tragedy. Will we ever get the truth of,
yes,
of how that happened?
Because the satellite photographs will show the trajectory either of the rocket or the Israeli fighter plane, one or the other. But I don't believe an Israeli fighter plane would have been targeted to strike a hospital. It's much more likely to have been a rocket which fell short.
You covered the Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War in 1973. You reported in 1982 as well. Has anything changed?
Oh, enormously. When the BBC went there, I was first there in the 67 war, then the 73 war, then many times afterwards, because I got close to Ariel Sharon, and throughout the wars in Lebanon was there with him. There was a balance. There was always a balance. And what is remarkable is that the balance has gone. But the most important deficiency of the BBC now is that in those days there were experts on the Middle East. Now, Clive Myrie, for example, yesterday on the 6 and 10 o'clock news, on his potted history of Israel, says that in 1947-48, the Jews expelled the Palestinians or the Palestinians fled. But he didn't say that they fled because they were ordered to by the Arab governments. Radio Cairo ordered the Palestinians to leave Palestine, get out of the way, go to Gaza, so they could push the Jews into the sea. Well, in the end, they lost the war, so the Palestinians didn't come back. But for 70 years, the Palestinians have been kept in Gaza by the Egyptians. And even today, at the lunchtime radio programme, the Arab spokesman says they wouldn't open the Rafah crossing to let the Palestinians out. They have kept them trapped there for all these years. And that's the great problem. The BBC never explains. Clive Myrie and all of them, they don't understand this very, very complicated history, which when I was in the Middle East, repeated with the BBC, we did understand because we spent weeks, months there, soaking it all in.
Selective blindness.
Well, blindness, but also ignorance. I mean, the thing is, you should have listened to feedback last week where they had Richard Burgess, the director of BBC News, on. This is the man who was asked to explain why they don't use the word terrorism, and he couldn't answer. And I thought, well, who is this man? Well, he was a sports reporter. So the director of BBC News is a sports reporter. Suddenly, he doesn't know anything about the Middle East. It's absolutely astonishing.
Indeed. I mean, do you think that the BBC has a blind spot in relation to Israel, generally, politically and historically?
Well, historically not.
I don't want to ask whether the BBC is anti-Semitic.
Well, they're anti-Israel now, there's no doubt. I mean, why would Bateman today have said don't trust the Israelis?
You're on record as saying you think the BBC is anti-Israel.
Well, they're reporting. Why is the BBC Arabic service, all the reporters now are being investigated for having supported Hamas in the last couple of weeks?
Can you label an entire organisation
I think the bias, Lise Doucette, her bias is definitely anti-Israeli in the last week. Jeremy Bowen tries to avoid that. He's the only person with experience who seeks to be even-handed. But the rest are always, in my view, not balanced.
The challenge that Israel now face is to defend themselves, to retaliate, and their plan, their military objective is to eliminate Hamas. But civilians will die.
Well, in every war. Look, when Britain bombed Germany from 1939 to 45, They never said we mustn't kill the Germans to remove the Nazis.
Dresden?
Well, Dresden was a total excessive, as was the Hamburg bombing. But they were desperate. I mean, in the end, it's like Hiroshima. If Hiroshima hadn't happened, then tens of thousands of American soldiers would have died landing in Japan and taking Japan. In the end, war is about civilian deaths. It's awful.
Will the international community allow Israel to defend herself?
Well, I think the only people that can deter Israel would be America, and I don't think Biden is about to do that.
Yeah. And how do you see this playing out? You know the region well. I mean, have we got months or years of this?
Months. In the end, Hamas will be destroyed. In the end, somehow they will find a solution, but it'll go on, and I don't think Israel can afford to let it go. This key element in all this is whether Iran, which is not an Arab state, Iran decides to unleash Hezbollah. But my view is that now, with the Americans present there, will be a great risk by then. The greatest tragedy of all is it all could have been avoidable if Bibi Netanyahu had not been Prime Minister. If only Israel hadn't been beset by the most dreadful internal rows.
Well, it was a security breach for a start, but there's a political problem as well.
You know, a corrupt government cannot, in the end, succeed.
Tom, thrilled to have you back in the studio. I look forward to your speedy return. My thanks to the brilliant broadcaster and journalist Tom Bauer, whose, by the way, biography on Jeremy Corbyn is a page-turner, let me tell you. Now, let me give you a response from the BBC. They've said, we always take our use of language very seriously. Anyone watching or listening to our coverage will hear the word terrorist used many times. We attribute it to those who are using it, for example, the UK government. This is an approach that has been used for decades and is in line with that of other broadcasters. Well, it's time now to reveal today's Greatest Britain and Union jackass. And with me to have a chat about that, I've got, first of all, Esther McVeigh. Esther, who's your Greatest Britain?
OK, it's Matt Goodwin for taking on the BBC because they couldn't bring themselves to say Hamas was a terrorist organisation, even though it's prescribed to be so. And their justification for not saying it was absolutely squirmingly awful. So good on Matt for taking on the BBC.
Well, let me tell you that Matt Goodwin is one of my absolute favourite public intellectuals. His Substack articles are brilliant, MatthewJGoodwin.com. How about you, Derek? Who's your Greatest Britain?
Well, I must be your second favourite public intellectual. And my nomination this week is going to George Baldock, and he's from Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
He is a 18-year-old who dropped out of school at 11 because he had anxiety problems and nervousness problems. His mother said that she never, ever saw him smile as a child. But today, he started an undergraduate degree at Cambridge University in history. And that's a typical example of the British indomitable spirit.
What a fine lad. Congratulations, George. OK, and Rebecca, you're a brilliant hero today.
Another public intellectual who I'm sure you adore, Madonna. She's back, she's performing, she was incredibly late, she didn't do as many songs as she was supposed to do, she made everybody cross. That is proper diva behaviour and I love it.
OK, well, I like Madonna too, but I'm going to give it to that brilliant young student, George, who did so well, and good luck with your degree at university. OK, what about your union jackass, Esther?
Oh, it's got to be the Welsh Senate there, who's banned. They've banned GB News from their buildings. However, I wouldn't be too upset, GB News, because I'm not thinking there are going to be too many of Mark Dreyfus's acolytes watching GB News there. But what a disgrace. It shows them to be narrow-minded and quite ignorant that they can't see another point of view.
Plus, they're missing out, including your brilliant show with Phil at the weekends. How about you, Derek, your union jackass?
It's got to be Hannah Ingram Moore, who's the daughter of the late Captain Sir Tom Moore, who was today in court challenging a demolition order on a spa building that she has built for personal use. I think she's really tarnished her own reputation and that of her late father's.
OK, now she says it's for the foundation and a legacy that many locals can use, older people with health problems. But look, thank you for that. How about you, Rebecca, your jackass?
Mine's Alicia Keys, who, as you discussed earlier with Nana, either is incredibly poorly informed or not brave enough to nail her colours to the mast for Palestine and really, really problematic. But she shared an Instagram post saying she wanted to take up paragliding when paragliding was used as a tool for war crimes earlier this week by Hamas.
OK, brilliant. Well, look, here is the winner. Yes, indeed, it is the Welsh said Ed. Thank you so much for my brilliant pundits tonight. You for your company. I'm back on Friday for Mark Dolan tonight. Friday to Tuesday inclusive. The brilliant Patrick Christys is here tomorrow.
Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The storm system has yet to fully arrive, but once it does, it's going to drop a lot of rain between now and the weekend. Storm Babette is brewing down to the southwest, initially throwing rain up across the south during Wednesday, but then continuing to track northwards and kind of becoming slow-moving on Wednesday night over Northern Ireland, Northern England, and then into parts of eastern Scotland, where we have an amber warning in place, but we have yellow warnings across a good part of the UK. Keep up to date with those weather warnings through the Met Office website. Back to tonight, and some rain across parts of Northern Ireland. May turn a little heavy later in the night, but for many it'll be a dry night. The winds continuing to strengthen, and with a lot more cloud, it'll be a much milder night compared to recent nights across Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland. And for many, Wednesday will still be a dry and a bright day. Northern England, Eastern England, good part of Scotland staying dry, but there'll be showery rain over the Midlands, Wales and Southern England. That's going to pep up as we go through the day. Could turn pretty heavy during Wednesday evening across the south, with a strengthening gusty wind as well. Wet and windy weather also working towards Northern Ireland, so some heavy bursts likely here through Wednesday evening. Temperatures into the teens, even the high teens in the south, but not feeling very warm with the wet and windy weather, which continues through Wednesday night. And then on Thursday, grinds to a halt across eastern Scotland, hence why we have that amber warning in place here, but there'll still be heavy showers elsewhere as well.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.